Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello and welcome to episode 59 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast with me, Rory Lees-Oakes, and with me as ever, my colleague on the journey of all things counselling, Mr. Ken Kelly. How are you, Ken?
I am well. What a journey it is, the journey of counselling, from learning right through to being a practicing counsellor. Wow, what a privilege it is. And today we have a great episode. I believe it's going to be a good one, and I've used the word believe there in inverted commas because we're kicking off. Our first topic is about our beliefs, and we're going to be debating whether our own personal beliefs, our frame of reference, can somehow impair the counselling process or clash with the customer's frame of reference, or I guess the client, not really customer, customers now, Rory. Then we're going to be going on to theory with Rory, an interesting one. We're going to be looking at Eugene Gendlin, focusing on focusing. And this is an interesting one because it kind of parallels person-centered theory. Tell us a little bit more.
Yes, well, Eugene Gendlin worked with Rogers at Wisconsin, which was Rogers' final university, really, before he kind of lost interest in therapy and went off to La Jolla to kind of explore other areas of interest. But Eugene Gendlin developed a spin-off of person-centered therapy called focusing, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about Eugene Gendlin, a little bit about focusing. I've got a super-duper handout, as always, for people who might be studying focusing, just some overview of Gendlin's work. And unusually for a theorist, he's still alive, or at the day this was recorded, he's still alive. We usually talk about people who are not with us anymore, but Eugene Gendlin is still practicing away.
I'm looking forward to this one, Rory, and I think it's a useful topic because often we're called in the assignments to speak about the modern developments of maybe a modality like person-centered, and this is definitely a contemporary development in person-centered theory, so well worth getting that handout. And of course, we're going to be ending episode 59 today, as we often do, by debating a topic that has been brought up in our Facebook group, and it's one that kind of rears its head quite often, and it's about hitting criteria and how sometimes that we're learning and that we're putting in our assignments, it's sometimes tricky to understand what the awarding bodies, what the examiners want in their answers, and it's referred to as hitting criteria. So I'm looking forward to that one, and a great one if you write assignments. But kicking off with also a comment that came in from our Facebook group, Rory, and this is about our personal beliefs. Can you kind of fill us in, give us more?
Yes, well, if you want to know what our Facebook group is, we could go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor, that's 2 L's, we spell counselling the English, British, UK way, and we're a closed group. We've got over 1,400 people in the group as it stands, and they're all interested in the world of counselling and psychotherapy. And I'm going to give a shout out to our moderation team, Darren Hotwood, Julie Naylor and Steve Rigler. They are people who volunteer to moderate the group, keep it nice and safe, keep it on topic, and they also post, they do a Friday post talking about their experiences of training. So really join that Facebook group, very vibrant community. And we get questions from the group, and this one is for Angela Parveen. So hi, Angela. And she says, hope everyone is having a good Friday. Well, I'm certainly having a good Saturday. I'm looking forward to the weekend. I would be interested to hear how some of you guys would respond to this essay question, and maybe you can share examples of conflicts in practice. What might your personal beliefs, values, experience be in conflict with the underlying ethos of person-centered therapy? So I think what she's asking here, Ken, is how our own belief systems, how our own sensibilities may clash with the theory and I guess with the client. And
it's a great topic, and it's one that's dear to my heart. And if we look at how we see ourselves, that we accept as truths, I remember in my training getting to the point where I actually had to really have a sit down with myself, a serious chat with myself, Rory, and ask whether my truths were in fact truths or they were just my truths and the way that I saw it. And I remember that being it shook the very foundations of who I am. And it was quite painful, to be honest, when I reached that point, that the truths that I'd held for so long could potentially not really be truths. And I think we're called on to examine ourselves in personal development as we do that journey into becoming a counsellor. And that's part of it, looking at our self-concept, how we see the world.
Yes, indeed. And I always say there's a really good quote, and it's sometimes attributed to Voltaire. I disapprove with what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. Actually, Voltaire didn't say that. It was even Beatrice Hall in his biography, Friends of Voltaire. I'm just showing off now, Ken. But what it comes down to is that sometimes this idea of offering unconditional positive regard, which is, I think, what we're really talking about here, can really collide with our own value systems. And, you may get a client who has different political views, different kind of views on everything and anything from you. And as a practitioner, really, you're not there to espouse your views on things. You're there to support the client. And it can be very, very tricky. Certainly, if you've got a client who may have some quite, shall we say, different polarity of views from you. And I'm thinking of all that's going on in the media now regarding what's going on in the world, Islam, and the views on that, and there's some very extreme views, and that can be a very tricky place to be, I think, as a practitioner, Ken.
I think you're 100% right there. Tricky indeed when our truths clash with that people bring in. I remember working in an exercise during my counselling training on what kind of clients would I struggle to work with. And I think that that's a good call out, and that we should all think about that. Who might you struggle to work with and why? Even in presentations, what may somebody present with that you would struggle to work with? And again, just looking at the media at the moment, it's the time of making this. There's been a lot of unrest and upset in the Houses of Parliament in the United Kingdom regarding sexual harassment, and in Hollywood, in the movie industry. And how might it be? Would you be able to work with somebody who came in that had been maybe accused of sexual harassment? Or would that conflict with who you are as a person? Is that so wrong that you couldn't work with that person? And these are things that we need to examine, because we don't know who may walk in that door, who may sit in that chair. And if somebody does bring something in that we're not able to work with because of our self-concept, what do? We need to refer them on to somebody who can. That's, I guess, respectful for that client.
Yes, I'll certainly do what you did, Ken, which was take the very principled view of having a conversation with yourself and talking about realities, which reality, everybody has their own realities, and some people's realities can be a little bit skewed. But what I would say is one of the things that's sometimes not really touched on in training is by offering the core conditions, you're offering a version of a reasonable person. I think that's just so important, because you're being an adult, and as an adult, you're sat in front of the client and you're not colluding with people's beliefs. You're not espousing your own belief. You're just listening to them. And it might be, and I've seen this through the arc of therapy, that people actually change their beliefs, or people start to at least question them without me doing anything, because as they hear themselves speak, they're hearing their own truths. And as you said, Ken, they may say, I'm not quite sure if that is my truth.
It's such a great topic and a great conversation. And I like that you linked it into that unconditional positive regard. And I think sometimes unconditional positive regard is misunderstood. And it's thought of maybe in the early stages of learning counselling, that it is maybe perceived that no matter who that person is or what they do, it's okay. It doesn't mean that what that person may have done is okay. It just means that we don't judge them maybe for their past or the actions of the person, but we rather see the person as a fellow human being who sits in front of us. And when I think of unconditional positive regard, I struggled, I have to say, to truly understand what that meant when I was training. And it was my clients that taught me in practice what unconditional positive regard was. And now my favorite description of unconditional positive regard comes from Carl Rogers's beautiful book, A Way of Being, where he speaks about watching a sunset. And when we watch a sunset, we see it just as the sunset, as nature doing its thing. We don't sit there and go, if that sunset just had a tinge more purple, it would be perfect. It just is, and it just is what it is, and it is perfect every single time, no matter what. But a really interesting topic, yes.
It is. It's a super topic, and what I would say, just to finally end this, is that just because someone has an opinion, it's not all of them. It's not all of them, and sometimes there's a term in therapy called separating the sin from the sinner. Sometimes we have to see the whole person, not just one of their views. I think that's so important.
100%. Love it. And of course, that conversation can go on and on. Get into the Facebook group and continue that thread, because it's a discussion we should all have. And it's, like you say, Rory, we need to challenge ourselves on these. Moving on to Theory with Rory, an interesting one. We're going to be focusing on focusing. I like that. Tell us a little bit about what we can expect from this.
Yeah, we're going to be looking at a theorist called Eugene Gendlin. And Gendlin worked with Rogers at Wisconsin, and Wisconsin was the final university Rogers worked at before he went to his spiritual home in La Jolla, California. And he worked with Rogers on what was called a psych project, where they were seeing if person-centered therapy would work with people with schizophrenia. And some of that research is out there, and it's very, very interesting. But through the arc of that partnership, Gendlin went in a slightly different direction, and I'm going to be talking about focusing, which is another avenue of person-centered therapy. And as Ken said earlier on, if you're doing a new developments in person-centered therapy, focusing would come under a new development.
Without any further ado, it is Theory with Rory.
Counselling Theory with Rory Lees-Oakes.
So in this section, we're going to speak about the work of Eugene T. Gendlin and a theory that has become known as focusing. Gendlin was born in Vienna in Austria in 1926, and he died on May the 1st, 2017 in the United States. His family escaped the Holocaust and they emigrated to the United States while he was still a child. Gendlin was of Jewish heritage, and they had to flee the country, as a lot of Jewish people did during the Second World War. He studied under Carl Rogers during the 1950s and received a PhD in philosophy from the University of Chicago. So there is an interesting story about himself and Rogers. He was a student of Rogers and then became an associate when he qualified. And they both did research at the same time at the University of Wisconsin for a project which became known as the Psych Project. And the Psych Project was using person-centered therapy with people with schizophrenia. And Rogers was really interested to see if it would work. And there's still some research out there you can find. I think the research said that if someone was motivated, it would work. So that the schizophrenia side of it was really neither here nor there in terms of the therapy working. Obviously, it was quite serious for people with schizophrenia. But if people were motivated, there was evidence that it would work just as it would for people who didn't have schizophrenia. So that's kind of an interesting idea. Focusing is also a form of person-centered therapy. So I'm sure there are those of you who've watched or read the book, The Tribes of the Person-Centered Nation, and its kind of strapline is one nation, many tribes. And Rogers' work informs so many people. Natalie Rogers, his daughter, she went on to develop a form of art therapy, experiential art type therapy. Gendlin went on to devise focusing. Quite a few people went on. So for those of you who are doing, for some of your work, new ideas in person-centered therapy, this is it. Focusing is a new idea. It's a development of Rogers' ideas. And on graduating, Gendlin became Professor of Philosophy and Psychology at the University of Chicago. What very few people know is actually Gendlin's theories influenced Rogers. And the reason they influenced Rogers was because up till then, Rogers had got a lot of his ideas from the philosopher Søren Kierkegaard and the work of Husserl and Heidinger, hope I pronounced those right, who were phenomenologists. Well, certainly Husserl and Heidinger were. They were phenomenologists. In other words, they were interested in how, as humans, we experience the world and how it impacted on us. But Eugene Gendlin went a slightly different route. Yes, phenomenology, but he read a lot about a French philosopher called Maurice Merleau-Ponty. Now, Ponty had a different take on phenomenology. He thought it was a more felt, visceral sense. It wasn't just a cognitive or even just a general feeling view of the world. Remember, phenomenology is how we individually view our frame of reference. But Merleau-Ponty believed it was a real deep emotional bodily function, that we felt it in our body. And in fact, there's lots of people who've gone on to develop that idea. And of course, one of those theories based on phenomenology is, of course, Gestalt, which has, as we'll see as we go through, some of the same ideas. So Gendlin really changed Rogers' mind or developed Rogers' thinking in what was his last post as a researcher at Wisconsin before he went on to go to La Jolla, California, which was his final place, Behavioral Sciences Institute. So what does the theory of focusing tell us? Well, it's an approach where the client where the therapist helps the client gain an awareness of themselves in a body felt sense. So this is very much, the focus really is on how we feel. What does our body tell us? You can see why I say it's got quite a strong parallel with Gestalt. The primary goal is to direct the client's attention to things they experience, which may be difficult for the client to describe in a concrete way. So sometimes in the world of education, we talk about the cognitive, affective and psychomotor domains. Well, cognitive is how we think, affective is how we feel, and psychomotor is how we do things by touch. Bricklaying would be a psychomotor type activity. We'd have to move our hands. But this theory really does focus on the affective domain. In other words, it focuses on the part of us that feels very, very strongly how we experience the world. And the primary goal is to direct those things that people experience, which may be difficult for them to cognitively speak about. So you ask a client, well, how does that feel? They may not know. But by saying to them, well, tell me how it feels here, or how it feels in the body, that might give a real clue. And effectively, what Gendlin talked about was it being really on the edge of awareness. And the edge of awareness is a kind of no person's land between our subconscious processes that we're not aware of and those things that we're super conscious of, that we can see, that we know we're doing. The edge of awareness is that kind of twilight area of consciousness where we're aware of things, we know they exist, but we're just kind of not sure what they are. And by using this felt sense, it can bring that into focus. And the goal of focusing therapy is for clients to learn to stay with the felt sense and how it speaks to them. Now, there are some techniques. Focusing is an approach where the therapist helps the client gain an awareness of themselves in a bodily felt sense. So we know that. But the primary goal is to direct the client's attention to things they experience, which may be difficult for them to talk about in a concrete way. So there is an element here of direction. So a traditional person-centered therapy is totally non-directive. But there is a direction. So in other words, the focusing therapist would say, try to focus on how you're feeling, what's your body telling you. So a little bit like Gestalt, which, as I said earlier, shares the same phenomenological roots as a therapy. The goal of focusing therapy is for the client to stay with this felt sense and how it speaks to them. So as the client gains a sense and an understanding of how they feel, then the next logical step is for them to be able to articulate it, because they're using their body as a translator. So their body is translating to a great extent those edge of awareness, ideas or thoughts, and it speaks to them, and then the body can, through that body, they can say, well, it feels like my body's doing this. And with this deep focus, they can then begin to articulate what's going on for them. Now, there are some techniques. So again, for those of you studying the developments of person-centered therapy, there are techniques, whereas in person-centered therapy, traditional, there wouldn't be techniques. One is called disidentification, and it's a term that refers to how the client separates themselves from unknown feelings. So they may say, I really don't know how I feel. So in this disidentification phase, the therapist responds by asking the client to separate the I and focus on how their body's responding when experiencing an unknown emotion. And it's not unusual for clients not to have a roadmap of emotions. So some clients just don't, you ask them how they feel and they genuinely don't know. They haven't got a roadmap. So again, this focusing really does act as as a translator. It kind of translates how they're feeling, and they can explain that. They can give that a voice. Now, in the therapy, there's something called a joker question, and it's a way of the therapist responding to the answer, I don't know how I feel. And a joker question would be the therapist saying, what do you feel like at this moment? And it helps take the client's ownership and focus on how their body's responding. So instead of saying, how do you feel, and waiting for a cognitive response, one from the brain, they ask for a body response. And then the client talks about how their body's responding. And then both of the therapist and the client can explore that, the meanings for the client in that space. And I put some links in to the handout. So I put a couple of links into Focusing, which is focusing.org, which is a site purely for focusing, and also a link to Focusing Oriented Psychotherapy, a manual of the experiential method, and that was written by Gendlin. And you can go to the page of the book on Google Books where it kind of talks in his own words about therapy and its theory.
Thank you very much, Rory. Really, really interesting. And of course, if you want to get Rory's super duper handout, you can do so by just going to our mother website. That's where you can find out more about Counselling Tutor. And that is, of course, counsellingtutor.com, 2 L's in counselling, UK spelling way. And when you get to the website, just click on the podcast tab. It's right at the top in the menu. And you go down to episode 59. All of the show notes are there. Everything we've spoken about today is paraphrased and written out, and you can download Rory's super duper handout on focusing right from within that page. And of course, if you are a member of the Counselling Study resource, then that has already been added to the Handouts Vault for you. And if you're a Handouts Vault member, you just jump in there and you can, of course, access that handout anytime you like. So moving from focusing on to hitting criteria, Rory.
Yes, I can hear the collective boo as boo criteria. And we're grateful again to Anita Ginge, who is one of our Facebook members. And she said, I'm currently doing level 2 certificate in counselling skills. Fantastic. What a great start to a counselling career right at the beginning of your journey. And she says she's enjoying discovering my true self and finding the journey very interesting. I am, however, growing a dislike for criteria. Sometimes I feel it could be worded differently. So I just wondered if it's me or if it feels this way. Well, the answer to that is, yes, it does feel that way, and it's not you. I can disabuse you of that. I've never met any learner in my career as a teacher who went, oh, yippee-doo, it's criteria.
100%. And, you know, we say this often. I'm going to say it again. Very often, people who come to study counselling do so not through the traditional academic route. It's unlikely that you might, and it's not never, but it is less likely, I guess, that you may go to college and then go to university to study counselling straight away. Usually you go out, live some life, and there's something that happens in life that may call you towards counselling, or you get an interest out to be called into counselling. And so often, if you've been away from the academic world for some time, the criteria can be like a foreign language, Rory.
It can be a foreign language. And I think it's worth remembering that a lot of academia is about accuracy. It's about answering the question. I'm sure some of my former learners cringing at hearing that, because that's what I used to say. It's about answering the question. And what I would be inclined to do is have a look at the criteria. And there are a number of useful resources on the net, things like what's analyse, what's evaluate. On level 2, I suspect it'll be list, explain, define,
describe,
because you usually that type of thing. But having said that, I seem to remember I wrote a few years ago a key to criteria, Ken, and it's in the CSR, isn't it?
It is. So what is the CSR? It's the Counselling Study Resource. So as you know, Rory and I put out a ton of free materials. This podcast you're listening to now is part of that we give out, and we do that because we care and we want to do this. But we also do have a paid for section of Counselling Tutor. It's called the Counselling Study Resource, and within that there is a whole assignment support section, and within that there is a book that Rory wrote on, I guess, doing better in your assignments, and it covers criteria in depth. I've got it in front of me here, and it's kind of gives you the definition. It decodes the criteria into easy to understand language, and there's words like account for, analyze, assess, argue, comment on, compare, contrast, criticize, define, describe, discuss, evaluate, emulate, explain. It's all of the stuff that you might see: interpret, illustrate, justify, outline. It's those criteria words that are often used in academia, and then a bit of a paragraph explaining what they actually mean by that. So if you're a member of the Counselling Study Resource, pop into the assignment section and go and download this book. It's under assignment resources. And if you're not a member of the CSR, you're wondering what that is, we'll give you the link at the end of today's program. But you know what I often hear, Rory, and when we were lecturing together, I heard it from the learners, is that it almost feels like the criteria are these hoops that you have to jump through, and very often the criteria can seem so far removed from what counselling really is, where it's two human beings sitting in a room and connecting on a deep and meaningful level. And that is true. However, the awarding bodies have to have some way of evidencing that we know and understand this information, and I guess those criteria are that way of them evidencing it. And it's, I guess, not perfect, and it's not a perfect fit for counselling, but it is the route that we have to take to become counsellors. We've got to evidence that we do understand the theory, we do understand the skills.
Yes, and if it's any consolation to you, Anita, one of my learners many years ago really struggled with the criteria. It seemed that she was sat in my office every week, and I heard the other week that actually she's attending university now to do a degree. So just stick with it, and you'll pick it up. It's just like another language, and once you get the key to it, you'll be away. But it's been a fantastic episode, hasn't it, Ken?
It has. Just before we go out of this, something that just jumped in my mind, Rory, that we're often asked to analyze, compare, and contrast in assignments. And if you watch an episode of Top Gear, do yourself a favor and go and watch an episode of Top Gear, it runs here in the United Kingdom. And when I watch it, I always think, watch how they show the car, watch how they describe the car, watch how they analyze the car, watch how they compare the car to other cars. Maybe this is just me, my frame of reference coming in here, but I think it's just such a great example of comparing, contrasting, and analyzing. It's just fantastic. So there you go. Go watch an episode of Top Gear and pop that in your assignments.
No, don't do that. Your tutors will not be happy if you're focusing. It's not Jeremy Clarkson anymore, but
No.
yeah. But yeah, Ken makes a very, very good point. It's something that we do all the time. It's just that we don't know it. Of course we analyse, of course we compare and contrast. If we go down the shops, if you're looking at prices and things you're buying, you're comparing and contrasting.
Yep.
We do it all the time. It's just we don't give it a name. And I think that's probably the problem that people come across.
So episode 59, we started off by looking at our personal beliefs, how that may clash with the counselling process. Theory with Rory, a really good one and great for those assignments where you're asked for contemporary developments in person-centered theory, where Eugene Gendlin was discussed and, of course, focusing. And then we ended on looking at that elusive criteria that needs to be hit, that foreign language, and that I guess once you understand what that language is and you've got that decoded description of it, it starts getting easier and easier. I liked that example you brought, Rory, of a student who really struggled with that and who is now in university and I guess used to the new academic language.
Yes. So the key is stick with it. She did. I've got great respect for her. She really did stick with it. And, a great respect for a lot of people who come through the vocational route because maybe like myself and Ken, you're second chances. People who've maybe didn't go straight from school to university but have found a different way of exercising your intellect and your passion for the work. So, congratulations to you. And as always, as we say at the end of these episodes, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take care. If you enjoy the topics and handouts here on the Counselling Tutor Podcast, then you will love the Counselling Study Resource. CSR was built by myself, Ken, and Rory Leesoaks to give you the support you need during your counselling studies. So get access to the world's most comprehensive collection of resources aimed at supporting you in your journey to become a counsellor. Take the stress out of your studies by visiting counsellingtutor.com/CSR. That's counsellingtutor.com/CSR.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.